welcome everybody. I'm Sue Flocky from the Prevention Research Center for Healthy Neighborhoods. This is our Wednesday seminar series, and I'd like to welcome you all. If you didn't sign in, please do that. There's a couple of sign-in sheets that helps us track who's here, and so we can get in touch with you for future events. I'm really excited to introduce today's speakers. We have a panel that will be presenting on this Healthy Eating, Active Living project, or series of projects, really. And I'm really excited to hear more about this and how all the connections are made here. So we have three speakers. The first is Byrd, Chappelle, who is the founder and principal of Strategic Solutions Partners. Our second speaker is Dr. Eileen C. Holzer, who is on the faculty at CASE, but at Metro Health. Some of you have seen her present here before, so we're excited to hear about that. And then last but not least, we have Eric Chambers. Many of you who remember did some time here with the Prevention Research Center and went on to carry on really terrific work. Each of them had a role on this project, which I think will show up on the title slide, and I'll let Sandy talk about that a little bit more. I do want to remind folks that we're embracing the idea of live tweeting. Our hash tweet and hashtags are over here about PRCHN seminar. So feel free to prompt the conversation and share it with others that are available. Our presentations are recorded and are posted up on our website. If you want to revisit this or send the information to somebody that you thought should have come to the talk or would have really enjoyed the talk, feel free to share that. And likewise, you can always go back and see other presentations that have happened in the recent year. So with that, we'll just go right ahead and move into our presentation. We'll leave a little bit of time towards the end for discussion, but looking forward to the talk. So, Sandy.
So this talk is about a model for authentic community engagement. And as you can see, there are several of us in the room who were instrumental in both conceptualizing and then developing this model within the community. Support for the Healthy Eating, Active Living work for the Buckeye, Larchmere, Woodland Hills community was made possible by the St. Luke's Foundation, the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, the Metro Health System, and Neighborhood Connections. Our objectives today are to explore the role of social determinants of health in ensuring equitable health outcomes, to discuss place-based approaches to addressing health disparities, such as the Healthy Eating, Active Living work in Buckeye, Larchmere, and Woodland Hills, to discuss phase 1 and 2 of that HEAL work, and to discuss new opportunities with scale, and then to provide you with the opportunity to review and ask us questions about how this work evolved. So I want to start a little bit about concept development. And for any of you who have been familiar with the work that's been done by the Cuyahoga Place Matters team here in Cleveland, you know that we have been promoting a model of health equity that really begins to talk about that health begins in the communities where people live, work, learn, worship, and play. And so that's where we conceptually began the thinking about how we would engage community. Though we didn't have this terminology at the time, or at least I didn't, what I've come to learn since the time we implemented this work is that we were really adhering to principles of cultural humility. And that's a lot different than just saying cultural sensitivity, because it really speaks to the fact that we all recognized that we needed to learn from one another, whether it was a large community institution like Metro Health or the St. Luke's Foundation and its employees and resident members and other nonprofits in the community. We were really committed to saying that everybody brought some knowledge to the table, everyone had wisdom. We needed to learn from one another, and we needed to incorporate in how the work was evolving, because this is iterative work, it's not stagnant work, a reflective practice that made us step aside and begin to think about what we were learning from one another and then put what we were learning into practice. The work requires a long-term commitment. We all know that health isn't created in a day. And so if you're going to really work within community to foster better health outcomes, that it's going to require a sustained commitment. And then the whole concept of connectedness. And that connectedness really talks about not just a connectedness among the residents within the community, which is really important, but a connectedness between the residents and nonprofits and commercial institutions within the community, but also to begin to develop a connectedness between the residents and those nonprofits and organizations in community with people who shape policy for neighborhoods. And so one of the things that Dr. Seeholzer would tell you is that she and I kind of, sometimes even at night, really thought through how to really develop this work, was the whole notion to fidelity of theory of change. Because one of the things that we've learned is that people often talk about how they're going to shape and launch work, but then they fall back into the practices that they're most comfortable with. And this work was definitely not about the status quo or doing business as usual. So the key principle in the work was really to allow community to envision, lead, and sustain culture change within their neighborhoods. We all know how we want to live, and we thought instead of coming in and parachuting in and telling residents, here's a project that you need to implement to improve your health, we said to them, we will work with you to support your vision of culture change within the community and provide you with some resources that would include a community health fellow to help you get that work activated. And I wish Janine Leon was here because she was so instrumental in helping us identify the first community health fellow for the work, Vedette Gavin, who was and is phenomenal. She understood and got this concept, unlike many of the other folks that we interviewed. Eileen will tell you that I was almost in a trance there for a while, believing that we would not find anybody who was actually hearing what we were saying needed to be implemented within community. So in addition to a mid-career professional who already had some expertise and practice in the work, we wanted to not just take from them, but we wanted to give some things back to them. And I can recall the day that Eileen and I were talking about making sure that this professional was equipped with both theory and practice for them to advance in their professional career. And that they would understand, particularly from my perspective, how to build upon a health equity framework. So this framework was introduced in our community probably in about 2009 or thereabouts from some work that as a Cuyahoga Place Matters team, we learned from Alameda County in California. And they had really developed this whole framework that really looked at the root causes of health. So it looked at what the research was saying, and it talked about where our efforts should be really intensified so that we didn't just look at downstream solutions to health, but what the root causes for health were in community. And I like to call this slide now the 70-cent solution, because we had been focusing on the 30%, which is critically important, that relates to a traditional medical model. But what the learning and the research was showing us was that the real root causes of health really lied in what you see under those columns of social factors and ecological factors. So if any of you have been following the work that's being done in the community through HIPC and Cuyahoga Place Matters, we're talking about not advantaging or disadvantaging people based on a series of isms. And we don't have time to really get any more deeply into that work, but just, those discriminatory beliefs, what happens with institutional power, whether it's conscious or unconsciously advantaging or disadvantaging people. And we are focusing really in that middle column, so it's really kind of more midstream, related to family and culture and those social inequities that relate to neighborhood conditions, particularly the social and physical factors found in neighborhood environments. So the community context in which we were developing this work, it was really a privilege to be able to work at that time at a foundation that had really invested a tremendous amount of work and energy into listening to community and understanding where their priorities were and what their values were at the time. And so we were able to leverage what had been done in community through community development corporations and work that was being done through the Metro Health Foundation and its Closing the Gap initiative. I'm blanking on some other work, but there was a tremendous amount of work. Policy Bridge was in the community as a second phase, really helping people to understand how opportunity is shaped by policy. So we were doing some really broad contextual work that set the frame for community really beginning to trust that there were a group of folks, whether inside or outside the community, that were dedicated to both hearing and promoting their vision for how to create a healthier community. We had a really deep belief in the community's capacity to contribute to this work, what at the time we were calling both people and place. And that belief was demonstrated in some of the autonomy that was given to the community, that the community itself shaped and composed the leadership committee versus the nonprofits who would usually be the leaders in a community and the community being asked to come alongside and support the nonprofits. We flipped that in this work, and the communities served as leaders. The nonprofits served as advisory team members and supporters and helped actualize what was being shaped and framed within community. And that is demonstrated in that bullet that you see that talks about partnership and support. There really was this principle of cultural humility that was being activated, and this respect of community wisdom and knowledge, regardless of where they worked or whether they worked or not, what their level of education was. There was a respect that community had some wisdom and wealth of knowledge that they were contributing to advancing this whole notion of community revitalization. And we talk about movement building within that context as well. And so the work was not only about helping community to shape healthy eating and active living opportunities, but it was more broadly about helping community to understand that there was a commitment from others outside of and within community to helping them understand how to really activate this health equity framework that relates to values and policies and systems change. So hopefully the work as it continues will begin to expand and become more iterative so that it is connected to the broader movement here in Cuyahoga County that really speaks to a health equity frame for how we create a stronger, more vibrant community and hopefully extend that knowledge to the rest of America. I'm a really big picture, hopeful thinker. Always believe that, that we have something to contribute more largely to the country. And it probably sounds silly, but that's how I think. And so here's the frame from which we're really talking about. We talked about what values and those isms really shape the policies that influence how neighborhood conditions are shaped. We don't have time to go into it, but I will say if you will go to www.cuyahogaplacematters.com, you will see a report on History Matters, and you'll see the historical connection between how policies related to housing and who lived where, and current, more recently, how the foreclosure crisis and subprime lending impacted neighborhoods where really federal policy said these people are not worthy and these people are. And I'm not trying to be critical. I'm saying that left unexamined, if we don't examine historically what policies are shaping the conditions in our neighborhood, they'll continue to perpetuate. Thank you, darling. And they're really undoing a lot of the good work that people are investing within community. So we don't have time to dig into this model more deeply, but I will say that, family and culture, you heard us talk about how residents and the institutions within those communities and those that support residential communities need to shape the culture in which folks live, and to bring resources to bear on how residents are envisioning that culture within community so that neighborhood conditions are improved.
Start here for 1 minute. I'm going to try and cover all of the things that led to Vidette and Erica, which is because I want to leave the meatier parts to Erica, who will go over in 25 minutes or so the projects that and how they've evolved with the community-led voice. But I do want to introduce this work. For those of you who have known me for more than a little while, you know I'm an internist, so I do adults, not kids, not pregnant women. And my passion is trying to help folks with obesity. And I always knew I'd have to work with that interface between the clinic and the home, because people have to feed and exercise themselves. So I was always aware of this messy world, because people's most important medications are eating and activity, no matter what I do. So that wasn't particularly surprising to me. And I was privileged already to work with Sandy since a little after 2005, because I was the very fortunate recipient of what was a Century Grant, a long-term grant to address things through Metro Health in the Buckeye neighborhood, which included obesity, and had been developing some culturally, hopefully respectful programs to help people where they're at in the context they were at to address obesity. And Sandy and I had a lot of discussions about the numbers, which is why I'm leaving this up, of people who cited this in the neighborhood as a need and had this as an issue were very different than the people who were coming to the programs that we built. This is parachuted at some level, but basically the traditional model was a foundation, whether it was the Botanical Gardens or whatever, would hear, we need opportunities for our youth, or we would do whatever. And so then basically the nonprofit partners would go and work some magic and say, here's what we can do, here's what things, and come back and say, ta-da, and then welcome, and then people didn't come. At least not in the numbers we expected. I mean, I can't even tell you, although our model shifted actually based on this work, on Strides has changed, and now we have people beating down our doors, which is very funny. But we would spend time recruiting for something that was so prevalent, it was ridiculous. And so we talked a long time about this issue. It didn't seem like a trust issue, it seemed more like a fit issue and an ownership issue. People are invested in what they create, make, have changing. And so I was distinctly privileged that Sandy would put up with a lot of long conversations that we had. And this was actually what was happening in the community when we started the model. There was a ton of stuff happening in Buckeye, and St. Luke's was really at the center of facilitating, promoting, and funding a lot of that work in capturing community priorities. So they'd gotten the community voice on priorities. There was no issue about that. But again, in that traditional model, had then let people come up with projects to address those priorities. And it drove everybody crazy, and all the partners, that none of us were having the access and the impact that seemed to be resonant given the level and intensity of those priorities. And so Sandy, who is a wonderful, why is there a box, forget the box thinker, who said anything about boxes anyway, said, what if we have somebody who essentially, and this is kind of a little bit out of quality improvement, which is my background too, what if we had somebody who could act as a facilitator? What if we had somebody who could actually get people talking together in a different way? And what if we, you know, the reality is partners are intimidating to community, whether we think of ourselves that way or not. And what if we raised simply the physical presence to tip the balance scales, the power scales of the community, so that we actually could get community voice, not just by asking for it, but by really making it practically possible. And so this was what came to HEAL, and we're going to talk a little bit about this. So this is how the work developed around engaging the community and doing community-led pieces. Now, the reason I mentioned the quality improvement piece was, again, she was dealing with a physician and all her limitations who never dreamed I'd be in community work, and continue to find myself there. I don't know. Which I'm delighted and honored to be part of. I'm just not sure I'm qualified. But you know, for those of you who are used to the Institute for Healthcare Improvement, who oddly enough is currently funding our work, full circle, Don Berwick's piece in patient care and patient safety is do nothing about me without me. And so our principle in coming about this to the neighborhood was, well, wait a minute, do nothing about us without us. And that really was the reason for the If We Build It, We Will Come article, was the do nothing about us without us principle. And when we found Vidette, which I'll talk a little bit about, that she bought into that piece too. So the idea is that it's arrogant, this comes back to the cultural humility, to actually tell a community what to do. The people impacted by community planning and decisions should be empowered and involved through the entire process. in a live way, because what community is changes. There's ingress and egress at all times, and there's changing conditions. And so the idea that a community plan, and think about this from a funding standpoint, we're going to give the community the idea. This is why the St. Luke's Foundation, and with Sandy really at the helm of this, was very crazy. We're going to give the community the money to pick the goal, to define success and the measures for success. And we're not going to make that a condition of getting the money. We're going to say you're going to do it. We're going to give the money and then do the process. Our responsibility is the process. Their responsibility is the engagement. Most funders would be incredibly uneasy that what success was defined by the community and not by the funder themselves, or not by some common thing. And so this was prior, actually, to hiring Vedette with the community being fellow, and this is a facilitative role. What we did was basically look on the roles of this person, and their role was to be this facilitator, this action planner around community lifestyles, to coordinate engagement along with the advisory team, which, if you think about the moving pieces, we knew this was somebody who would have to be very comfortable and being action-oriented with shoe leather, both at the neighborhood level and the boardroom level, which was why finding this was a very big deal. And lastly, they had to be their own cheerleader. So this was that's why this couldn't be a newbie job. This was somebody who had to just absolutely tirelessly go, hi, here I am again, hi, here I am again, and here. So that was a really big piece of the puzzle, and we knew that from day one, that had to be the person's role, was connector, if you think in Malcolm Gladwell's terms, connector with a vision, connector with a vision, connector with a vision. The strategies were to create community outreach, to get to, as they say in church, the most important person is the person who's not in the pew, right? To create partnerships, and this partnership piece was really important, to create new relationships between partner organizations who really didn't have a way to connect because we're busy doing our work, and residents and organizations. And lastly, to deal with educational outreach, not just about what we're doing, but the opposite, but the need for it. That you as a community have said this is a priority. Did you know your neighbor said this too? Communities don't even have ways to know what each other are thinking, right? And to disseminate resources. This was actually a very resourced community. And most people didn't know about things when we did surveys. We knew that a lot of people, that you'd have notices of people who knew about this thing but not that thing, and if you went to this place partner, you wouldn't find out about the 3 other places. This was pre-211, right? So this is a big deal. That's why that's a big piece. So the output was going to be the number of collaborative relationships. That was actually one of the things we knew, was we wanted to make sure we had made connections. What happened to them was up to them, but that they got made was the responsibility of this project. And the number of community health dialogues and events that happened, again, how much there was truly place to facilitate. So this role was a convener, a non-bricks and mortar convener. And then our initial outcome looks that we're looking at were to increase collaborative planning on health issues and a commitment to improve health outcomes. But we obviously, with this, couldn't actually prove health outcome improvement. It was creating that voice and that commitment to it, so the actions were in line with that. The intermediate outcomes were that residents showed increasing healthy behaviors and exhibit control over their own health. Obviously, this is more anecdotal and participatory, but that's obviously, you want to see people's hands and feet in the game. This is not people who got a pamphlet, and we'll come to that later. And lastly, and I keep looking at you to correct me. Thank you for your head nodding. And last, to look at the enhancement of community capacity building to sustain good health. So the idea is, and obviously there's still community ingress and egress, but the idea is that people are transformed in who they are and how they are for having been involved and touched by the HEAL program. It's not just that you eat broccoli in the privacy of your own home, but that there's a ripple effect, is really kind of what it was. It's kind of the big, hairy, audacious stuff. Sandy wasn't thinking big at all. And so our strategic planning process had 3 stages. And the first piece was to identify HEAL resources in the community, and there were actually a great number of assessments that had already been done about that, and I'll show you a couple. Some were done by the PRC, actually, that we looked into. A lot were actually funded, though, by the St. Luke's Foundation through the neighborhood assessments and the neighborhood strategic planning piece. The second piece was actually to have a bunch of focus groups with people you might not expect in the community. In other words, you may have general ones where people who come to these, but we actually wanted to make sure we had youth. We made sure we had, for instance, home daycare people. We got a whole bunch of non-traditional folks who really impacted healthy eating and active living across the spectrum, but weren't necessarily affiliated or particularly engaged with schools or traditional organizations. And so that was another piece of that. And then we brought all that together to identify strategic areas around HEAL that we would do with partners, and lastly, to develop a strategic plan. And so, again, how we got to this was neighborhood events, which, again, focused some of the things you might think about. We're really getting to youth and seniors as well as people who are involved in the daycare homes, which are a big source of childcare in those neighborhoods. And visioning sessions, not just hearing sessions, but actually visioning sessions. We had a lot of those. I think there were 5 or 6 of those. Yeah, that were very well attended, hundreds of people at the community at large. And then using that to put together a community vision. And then again, a lot of it was the mapping of food, environment, active living features, gardens, markets, partner interviews. We did, and actually Vidette continued them, but we had actually started the process of interviewing and collecting what all the partners who had access to this neighborhood did. So there's a huge amount of work done before the launch. And then we created this community HEAL resource inventory and collated that stuff up before we had our first meetings. You guys may recognize this. This is kind of active living in the neighborhood maps that we show people. This is food retail. I don't know who did this. I'm joking. Yes. But we the point. You guys were part of the piece. So this is what we all brought to the table information-wise in 2009. Was it really that long ago? My God. To see about a community voice for community-led change. And this was where we went and looked at all the practice books, and basically everybody said you should have community-led change, and when we went to look at how, nobody could tell you how. And that's really fundamentally what I think our contribution is, and again, I'm a QI person originally, so this is mapping the process, because the whole idea to me is what is culturally sensitive and what is needed and how people are is going to endlessly change, because that's what happens to people over time. What we need is a process that can be a single process to address multiple issues that can be used in issue of your choice, community of your choice, that can be adaptable to those pieces. And that was our fundamental output. And would they come? Would it work? Would it sustain? And could it be addressed to other problems? And that's actually what all 3 phases of HEAL actually lead to. So we'll show you that process as we get there. So we wanted to activate community voice in a way that was sustainable and unintimidated, essentially, by what might be viewed as more powerful partners. Strategically align resources, create opportunities for action, and have that action, build community connectedness, and empower the community. I think most of us have been on at some point participated in some community advisory council, right? Can I see show of hands? Anybody who's ever been on some advisory council with community? A whole bunch of people in the room might. So my experience up until this point with community advisory councils, where you have a room full of partners, a buffet, 2 people from the community who got a $20 check. Think about the power structure there. And we're going to get all our community input from them, right? After we say what we want and what we can do. And they're going to feel free to tell us, yeah, right, that's way off base. I don't think so. So what our goal here with the Full Body Advisory Council was, yes, to get all the partners in here in the roles, but one of the big things was balance, and it was that it was a minimum of 50% of residents not affiliated with partners, because only then could we really begin to have enough bravery to actually address partners with frankness, because we knew we had to be getting some of the stuff wrong. So the idea was this Full Body Advisory Council would develop and advance the envisioned stuff. And again, we brought in the residents on the side, and the role was to work in these healthy eating, active living community work groups. What we did at the first minute meeting, and I swear, and I do wish Janine was here, she's unfortunately out with a health family member issue. She was very sorry she couldn't be here too, was Vidette led, and actually Sandy and I at this point were sitting there as the partner people while Vidette did this, representing our partner roles, was lead us through, given all those resource maps, how to define priorities. And so what happened was we presented the focus group themes and the advisory themes, and basically through a couple meetings, this is what the final work plan that evolved, because the idea was there's lots of things that we could do, but how we do them and what we do has to be focused in. And so there were really 6 pieces that the community felt were needed. It had to be accessible, affordable, healthy food, opportunities for active living that build relationships, and that was really key. They did not want to do things alone. It wasn't about having a DVD for your living room. It was not going to the gym at all hours. It was building relationships. Communication and awareness, that actually was part of the reason people were afraid to walk and things like that they didn't really feel like this network piece. And also, why am I not hearing about things at multiple places? Opportunities to learn and practice healthy living skills, healthy and safe community gathering places, multiple places, whether, and place with small p, not necessarily capital P, and interconnected communities. And again, when you think of communities, again, think smaller and larger. One of the first outcome pieces they said is you don't get to say somebody participated if they just came and listened to a talk. If their hands or feet were not involved, it didn't count. And so when they set the goal for success for the mission, you'll see that. So the mission for HEAL that developed out of that was to improve the health of Buckeye, Larchmere, and Woodland Hills community by making healthy eating and active living a part of the culture and everyday living in the neighborhood. And this was actually one of the graphics we used for mapping it. The Buckeye tree actually did not have to do so much that Buckeye is a neighborhood, because they get to be squidgy when one neighborhood feels left out, but Buckeye is the state, and Vidette was an alum of Ohio State, so I just clarify that before I get beat up by neighborhood folks. Because we had to capture it. But the residents, basically, you want the tree to produce good fruit, or the Buckeyes, and you go all the way down to the features of the neighborhood. And this was actually how we operationalized it and had people actually map out the partners and the community members where they were on the tree, who they were on the tree. And that was really fun, because that's how they could then talk about their active role in the community. So this was used as a process and repeated for how to get to know each other. And that was really effective, because it made it much more tangible. She should have been, was actually involved in 2/3 of phase 1, and very intimately involved in 2/3 of phase 1. So being the not on the ground person, I'm going to hand it over to her, because she's actually the public health practitioner. But I want to thank you guys all very much for listening. So you're up.
I was getting ready to do this.
No, come on up.
Grab my note.
All right. All right. You're in, and the notes show up. No, they don't have you.
They don't show up. I'll try my best. I may ad-lib a lot. Okay. I think I'm doing this right. Oh, no. Wait a minute.
Got it?
I think
You're
that's
left.
good
You're
enough.
good.
Okay, so thank you for that transition. So again, you can see here how we were trying to evaluate change within the HEAL initiative. So what I'm going to talk to you right now is about our impact. Everybody's always interested in impact, impact, impact. We like pictures, a lot of pictures. That's nice that we described all those numbers. People want pictures. You want to see what the movement really looked like. So what you actually see here with phase 1 is the actualization of those social, physical, and environmental changes coming to life, the activation of those 6 priority areas, and the process that we took to get there. One of the most successful things that we did during this first phase with HEAL was creating those fitness programs. We had no idea how much people were going to love these fitness programs. I currently run 13 of them. Yes, but the people love the fitness programs. It was a space where people were actually able to say, I have a gift, I have a talent. You mean to tell me that if I show you I can do this, you'll let me do it somewhere in my community? And we were like, yeah. And they were like, my cousin knows how to do Tai Chi. My brother over there, he does hip hop abs. There was other people like, well, I never thought about doing anything before, but I want to learn. So they just decided where they fit in, and we just let them. We just let them fit in where they got in. Another exciting initiative that we did was, of course, the Gardening Socks program. We ran that 2 years straight. That was a true labor of love, but it was amazing. So when we first started that initiative, people were like, okay, there's a lot of lead in the soil, and then half of us don't even know how to garden. So, and plus we're scared we might get hurt somewhere in the neighborhood. We don't feel safe at all the community spaces. So for those who were interested in actually using the community farm that was ran through the Cleveland Botanical Garden, we connected them with that organization. And for those who were really interested in getting their hands dirty, we said, okay, so we got to figure out a way to have people garden. They don't have a lot of space. People in Larchmere, there's a lot of apartments. There's not a lot of grass and places to just make gardens. They don't have big backyards. So garden stocks was introduced by another woman who was actually working at the Buckeye Shaker Square Development Corporation. I think I need to mention that. That wasn't mentioned earlier. The unique the unique opportunity that Vidette and I had when doing this work is that they placed us at the healthcare system in the Center for Reducing Health Disparities, but we also had an office at the local development corporation. So not only were we pulling in best practices from clinical and public health, we were seeing social determinants of health work right in our face by being in that community development corporation, what economic development looked like, what organizing looked like through their lens, how they were engaging residents, on the process that they use in their decision making when it came to allocating resources around social and economic opportunities. It was very insightful. So we partnered with them to actually activate this opportunity. So she and I helped create it, but we had people at the CDC who helped us to launch this. They really put in a lot of work with us to get this off of the ground. So I like to acknowledge them. I know they're not here and we don't often talk about them, but they were an instrumental in really helping to launch that project. What we learned from it was that it was great. We got a lot of feedback from people saying that they liked this garden sock, but it just couldn't stay watered. It couldn't stay watered. They found themselves the whole summer like just pouring on the water. And we also looked at what grew, what were they able to yield, what did they share, how did they share it with the community. A lot of people shared the food that they had with their family, and what they didn't have, they gave to their church or some other person in the neighborhood where they knew the food was needed. But we also realized that we had to couple it with workshops. So people were calling us like, yeah, I want one of those rain barrels. And we're like, you can't get a rain barrel. Part of what we do is if you get a rain barrel, it's because you decided to make a decision that you want to make this a part of your lived experience, right? Are you serious about really gardening? Because if so, you have to go through a workshop series to earn the rain barrel, and then you can have the rain barrel. And when they realized that, they had, so they were like, gimme. And we're like, you got to meet us halfway. And it really taught the CDC a lot too, because CDCs often create these programs and they just do it for free. They do it for free, and they can't figure out like why people don't value it or why they don't value them and the services that they provide. So you have to help people meet you halfway. So we had to help them shift their culture about how they were doing practice as well. So they were extremely excited about that. Very exciting work. So this is honestly a little over 24 months. It was more than 24 months when we hit that 1,800 mark. I know because I was the one putting the numbers in the database. And it was just exciting to see all these people to come together. The walking group was also one of the initiatives that I helped coordinate. And I ran that through one of our other partners, through Calvary Hill Church of God in Christ. And so they allowed us to use their space because the first lady over there is passionate about health. And her husband, which I realized had his PhD in urban planning, and I didn't know that, the pastor did, he was nuts about all of this infrastructure, changes, built environment. So, it was just a perfect marriage. So we had a lot of success during the phase one of really engaging people into the work. Is it already lit? Oh, I suck at this. I'll just walk on. Okay.
Watch the video.
Oh, she want me to. Where is that? Just put it in my pocket. Okay. So here you can see that the crux of the work was really this council. And you guys did a beautiful job of understanding this foundation was necessary for everything. If we couldn't get the foundation, with a house. If you don't build the foundation right, nothing else matters. It could be pretty, it could be beautiful, it's going to fall apart. So they did a really good job of infusing the resident voice into the strategic planning process. Because this is where the magic really happened. The community understood this somewhat, but it was an eye-opening experience for them because they didn't know about a lot of the resources that they had in their community. And over here, a lot of residents were just excited because they said they actually are listening to what we were saying. So much that I remember one of the residents was like, well, I remember that and I was talking about this. She was like, yeah, I asked them what they wanted to do and they were looking at me like, well, what are you going to do? And we're like, no. No. How are we going to use your voice? I don't know how to activate your voice. I need you to tell me how to activate your voice to bring it into this process. Once the light bulb went off, we saw this huge collective impact. And it's important for you to understand that this is an iterative process. Like, it's continuously ongoing, because what we know about work, when you do anything place-based, it's so dynamic, it's so multifaceted, it's so multi-layered. Anything that has anything linear in it, it makes me very nervous. Makes me very nervous. So you did a very good job of explaining how this process is just continuously ongoing.
And do you want to say a word about the action groups with the project?
Oh, okay, so the action groups. Well, they actually could see in those pictures that I showed you, some of those action groups were responsible for, because not everybody was interested in the same thing. So the action groups are really resident leaders who created ad hoc working groups to work on a particular area. For example, Ms. Vera's in here because she's actually part of it. Hey, Ms. Vera, I put you on the spot. I'm sorry. So she was part of the working group. You remember those meetings we were having at the church? All those years. All that time. So they were their own little working group and showing us what we should be doing around walking. Same thing for active living. Same thing for healthy eating. We really used that strategic planning process to use those community groups. And what was not mentioned about the structure of the council is this. Although the whole group decided on what we were going to do, the final decision was ultimately made by, she said, look at her, she said, yes. It was made by the residents. So the working groups are no good if the residents were like, we're not doing that. It just didn't happen. It just didn't happen. So I hope I emphasized that very well. Okay.
We talked about how we played the role and let the residents lead.
Oh, yeah. Oh, the final decision-making process, yes. So with phase 2, that started in 2014 until now, and this is really where I come in. So when we had our conversation with the St. Luke's Foundation, and there were all these staff changes, there were staff changes at the hospital, there were new people in the neighborhood, so we were like, okay, we have to figure out what our funders are looking at from us. We initially wanted to replicate this model into the Mount Pleasant neighborhood, and we want to do it and start up a whole nother coalition. But again, Vedette was deciding whether or not to go to Harvard. I was already on board, and we met with St. Luke's. They said, we're really interested if you can sustain this. Can you sustain this? Can you keep running right now what you have in place? So they said, I want you to transition to Erica, sustain the current initiative, sustain that process that I just showed you, sustain that, grow the membership and engagement, and implement the other resident identified priorities that hadn't been actualized yet. And so the first thing I did was I did a really good job of keeping a lot of the people who were on that initial coalition, and that is the one thing that is very different about Vedette and I. Like, she loves being in her face, and I'm like, okay, look, I spoke to them like 3 times. Like, how much more? She's like, you have to be persistent. You have to be persistent. Relationship is everything. Relationship is everything, Erica. Relationship is everything. And I said, okay, relationship is everything. And I kept that in the forefront of my mind. So when I onboarded new residents like Ms. Vera, I sat down with people with a small little tiny presentation. It was like 5 slides. And it essentially went through why HEAL was created, what equity meant, the type of work they would do, and the agreement that we have between them being a resident and me as a HEAL coalition leader, and the responsibilities and what they could expect from me and what I can expect from them. And if they didn't agree to it, I would ask them why and talk about it. But most of them agreed, and they were like, okay, and they just signed away. It was wonderful. It was very wonderful. So I got 8 new people. Over the course of the past year, I had 8 new people. I kept a lot of the organizations. Like I said, there was a lot of changes in the neighborhood. So there used to be 2 CDCs. When I came on, they merged, and that had caused a huge rift in the community. And I won't lie. Kind of merged. It made some of the work that we had begun, it made it, at that point, it made it very challenging. There were some new dynamics showing up in a community that I had to try to really navigate through. Easton Neighborhood House, Boys and Girls Club, the library, the garden, their structure changed. They weren't doing outreach the same way. They were doing outreach in the community. So I had to ask myself, what does our relationship look like now? Fair Hill Partners, the Buckeye Clinic, I brought on and really strengthened our partnership with the pastors. The pastors have an alliance in our neighborhood, and I infused myself into their process as well because they were really big on housing and on urban plight and really working with the young people around urban gardening and just active living as well. So I really had to infuse myself with them. Bridging the tracks, I mean, the artsy people are like nuts, but they are like, I mean, sometimes I'm an artsy person too, so that's why I can say that. But they are so creative, and I loved the uniqueness that they brought to the table. Same thing, the beauty and barber businesses. A new coalition started, and there was tension there between the businesses, so I was trying to navigate that as well. Benjamin Rose Institute, Vital Neighborhoods, and some other of the local food businesses that hadn't really talked to us before, so that was really fun. Of course, we kept a lot of the institutions, and I also decided to go a little bit higher. I was like, I want us to get some national partners in the mix and really fold them into the loop of heal. So Legacy for Health is actually a youth development foundation in DC, and they do work around active living, youth development, and tobacco cessation. And so I work with them over the past 2 years now, and we have a very close relationship with Harvey Rice K through 8, and we coordinate events. They come into the city. The kids who were chosen as leaders from the school are then flown to DC and then naturally become trained to become youth leaders. So this was like a huge connection that, I mean, when I met him, I was like, I don't have the resource to make them a national youth leader, but I know we have youth who want this opportunity. And now they're in other schools in Cleveland. They're even outside of our catchment neighborhood, which is great. Of course, the Institute for Healthcare Improvement, the Trust for Public Land, and 100 Million Healthier Lives, which I'll talk about a little bit later. And so you see here the same coalition overview, but I felt like I needed to make a few tweaks to it. So what I realized is that I have to do more work in ensuring that the resident leaders were really taking a more of a initiator role. And Ms. Vera can talk about that. We talked about this ambassador thing for months, trying to figure out how to differentiate their role from a traditional volunteer and what they will be expected to do, and then how would they work with me, and then how would I share information back to them. I mean, we have to really work through this process. I had never thought, I was like, I just didn't know it would require that much thinking to do. I was like, we have this in place, we've done this before in a different way. But we didn't. So I had a healthy eating ambassador, an active living ambassador, and I felt like I needed a communication ambassador. Because at times, Eileen spoke about this a lot, you have to be able to navigate grassroots, mid-level boardroom at all times. Sometimes doing the work, I was more mid-level and boardroom, and I wasn't always able to get at that grassroots leadership the way that I wanted, so I needed another mechanism that allows them to have more voice and leadership. And sometimes I was heavy grassroots and mid-level, but I wasn't able to get to the boardroom. So we worked on creating their roles, and they became responsible for their own residents and volunteers. Communication, that became more challenging. I realized I was going to have to really support that. But I'm happy we did it. I'm really happy that we were able to evolve that way and really transfer some of that leadership and that capacity to them. And it's been an ongoing process ever since. I was able to engage 1,480 people, and that's been over 80 years. They led something, they created something, they did something, they did an assessment, they reported data collection, door knocking. Everybody just had a role. Everybody had a role. So when we began to have conversations about what was the next step and what was needed to really continue this work, you know, the big S word came up. And for people who work in this field, the big S word is sustainability. Sorry if I don't know if I didn't say that. Sustainability, how do you keep things going? What it look like, what should it look like, and who should be at the table? What resources are needed? So during this time, I was looking into other funding options, and this opportunity came up through SCALE. I hope I say the acronym right. No, I'm not going to say it right. Okay, spreading community accelerators through learning and evaluation. So there were over 250 applicants. We made it through and became a finalist. They had this huge interview with us. We made it through that round. And HEAL is considered a national pace-setter community. So there are two types of communities that you could be a part of. A pace-setter, which is a evidence-based practice and community-based work that has shown experience in doing work that leads with health equity at the forefront. And then there are also mentor communities who are at the very beginning phases of trying to build up their work, but they need the support. So I work with a national team of 4 other pace-setter communities. Summit County actually won, and they're our mentor community. So Summit County has actually come up to Cleveland and been a part of our conversations and learning about our work. So this has been really good for us. The goal is really to support the local leaders to successfully reach goals and scale effectiveness. I am the local improvement advisor for Cleveland for this project. So the whole point is to really adopt quality improvement approaches. So with quality improvement, I'm learning all about this. Plan, do, study, act. Plan, do, study, act. I'm like, nobody wants to do a PDSA. But it's working. So they're all about testing and using data-informed decisions based on your test to make improvements. It's about, and I like this phrase because I try to say it to my group, lean forward, fail forward. Nothing is a failure. There's failure when you don't try. Fail forward. So now when I talk about anything in this work, I always say that, and I share that with you. Fail forward, because there's always opportunity in things that we didn't know, and always ways to improve on what was considered a failure. So that's essentially what we're doing. We're working with them more on how to really hone and scale our work to make it more far-reaching. We're learning how to more effectively target our work using data-informed decisions. And we now have community-specific measures for community health, for our community health improvement plan, which we finished back in December. I decided with our group that we really need to focus on the infrastructure of the coalition. I felt like I needed to do an assessment of the coalition itself and how I can really strengthen the capacity of it. It is the heartbeat of everything that we do. And if we aren't doing this effectively, it doesn't matter how many engagement and opportunities and lives I can touch, we need to be able to have a strong infrastructure. So a lot of our measures are those traditional measures that you saw around the resource, the physical, and what is the other one? Physical, social, and resource environment. I'm still collecting those measures. I'm still collecting those other measures that you saw earlier, but now I'll couple it with those coalition readiness, capacity building, resident partnership measures to really look at this picture more from a holistic lens. So again, right now, we're working through a process of developing and implementing our measurement plan, building capacity to lead change within the coalition, exploring sustainment models. And what I mean by that is, in my opinion, a sustainment model encompasses a few things: human capital, resources, and being ready to lead. I think those things are necessary in sustainment: human capital, resources, being ready to lead, and knowing when to find an opportunity to create that partnership. So we're working with them very closely on this and tools that can help us to get there. So here are some of our capacity building highlights that we're undergoing right now. I know a few people know about this. The fitness zone strategy that was implemented last fall, Vidette and I started that conversation almost 2 years ago. And it came about through a walking group because we went to Southerly Park and we saw those fitness equipment out there. And we realized that a lot of people weren't going to cross those tracks, so how do we implement something similar like that in our neighborhood? Trust for Public Land took a gamble. We got it done. We focused on three of our organizations that we work with the most. And they were also chosen because they touch all of our populations, youth, adults, and seniors. So they were chosen for that very reason. We also implemented data boot camps. So now we're working with people on how do you use data, how do you collect the data to really move the work forward. Grocery store workshops, personal training programs. We're rebuilding the gym at the church, and we're building a walking path around the campus of Easton Neighborhood House. So the last part of our scale that I want to talk to you about very briefly, Andrea is actually in here. About a year and a half ago, we began working with the Mental Health Advocacy Initiative. HEAL was the impetus for this work at Mental Health. They were so excited about the continuation of the work. Dr. Boutros said, I want to make an investment and see if you can launch this and take it to scale at your healthcare system. So here we have our 4 community health managers. Andrea is one of them right here. And for the past year and a half, Dr. Seehoser and I acted as their technical advisors and mentors. And what came out of this process was we've taught them about coalition building, health equity, disparity work. How do you find communities that are appropriate? Every community of need is not appropriate. And people think just because it's a community of need, you should jump right in. That is not the case. You need them to have the capital, the human capital, the resources, but most importantly, they have to be ready. They have to be ready because you'll go in and you'll spend an exorbitant amount of resources and figure out why you can't get anything done. They weren't at the right level of readiness yet. Not that they don't need it, they just weren't ready. So what came out were these 3 projects, healthy eating and the health, I'm gonna mess it up, Floma told us. In the West 25th Corridor with Eduardo, the CMHA residential healthy eating at Coreytown with Karen Cook, the falls prevention with seniors in Burkesville with Janet Montoya, and the youth development initiative that came out of Slavic Village with Andrea Martinez Peters. Yes, I said it. Okay. And from here, I don't know, Dr. Seeholder, if you want to add anything else.
No, I think if you want to put the next slide up.
Okay.
I think it took longer with the handoffs than we hoped. People can comment or ask about anything. These are some things we're interested in talking about, and I think all of us can stay for a little bit after the
I apologize.
pieces as well. So.
Yeah, we're now, let's please join me in thanking them. Really fantastic talk. And normally it ends at 1:15, but if they'd like to stay and if folks would like to stay and have a little bit of discussion, I think that would be fantastic. But I just want to be respectful of folks' time. But if we'd like to, if anybody would like to stay and have a discussion, we're happy to hang out for a little bit. But thank you all for coming. If you didn't sign in, please do sign in before you leave.
Thank you for listening. Thank you.
Questions? I have questions. Can you say a little bit more? I mean, so it's a really interesting model, and it seems like there are some very unique spins that have evolved through this work. And given some of the national presentations that you guys have done, how unique is this? Are there other folks that are doing things that are parallel, or others, coming to you to try to replicate this?
So,
hearing about that.
Actually, through this scale work, I work with 20 other national communities. I was just out in Oklahoma all last week with them. You'd be surprised at how many people are not working with people with lived experience. That's the term we're using now. So everybody is using lived experience. They're trying to figure out how to more effectively partner with lived experience. What I've realized there are very effective models around health equity and working with people with lived experience, but they all look different. What I've also realized is that it is dependent, it can be very dependent upon geographic location and the political environment. I mean, the people don't talk about it, but it has a huge impact on the design of these strategies in some of these communities. So yes, when I'm there, I talk a lot about working with people with lived experience, how you infuse their voice into work, equity, and what equity really looks like, because a lot of people are still using equity and equality the same way, using it the same way. They actually had to do a huge workshop while I was there on equity and equality, because Cleveland is ahead. Cleveland is ahead. And you talked about putting us on a national map. Cleveland is ahead in the way that we think about equity work. There's a lot of people who turn to Cleveland not only for the work through like what we're doing, Better Health Partnership, the work that you're doing at the PRC, the Cleveland Clinic. People are really, the UH with their whole social enterprise movement, people are really looking to us on how the heck are they activating these communities. And that's because I think for us, a lot of it came more naturally. Like we started thinking about equity and how to work with folks with lived experience in the forefront. Now what I think some of the other communities are stronger at are these collaborations that they have with institutions. Is with the institutions.
Can I jump in here on the funding, because you're undertutting your horn, but there's a structural issue that's kind of unique to Cleveland, and you asked about process. So one of the pieces I think you were getting at is this process one you're seeing elsewhere, and what I'm hearing on the national coaching calls where she's in groups is nobody's operationalized it as clearly as we have that I've heard, and
Yeah.
people are continually coming back to Erica because of the roadmap, as best I can see, and that roadmap does two things. It helps us know where we are and where we're going, but it helps. You know, if you think about collaboration, it doesn't mean telling somebody what you do. It's having somebody stand beside you and look at the same thing together. It helps you have that thing to look at together, measurement-wise and otherwise. So, leadership-wise, I'm hearing actually on these phone calls with 20 other groups on it, the national coaches are always saying, "Well, Eric can work." They come back to it all the time. It's great. So in that sense, in a thinking standpoint, and I think that part, which actually was eye-shining from the beginning, has been really helpful. Beyond the community respect piece, I think that's really allowed people to understand what their role could be in the community. So it's not just that they're engaged, but how to be engaged, what it looked like. And you know, one of the things on the council, which was bringing people in, is people get fatigued. They don't just move. It's, you know, people are going to do a council for a while, and then you need new people to do a council. It's that re-engagement process. And we've learned a lot more about our process and sustainment working with Andrew and the other guys. The second piece I'll say structurally about Cleveland that's tough, and this was an aha moment for Metro, and I will just leave this out here. So, with the Affordable Health Care Act, health systems have to do the community benefit piece. Interestingly, and I didn't realize that, county systems are exempt from that. Because it's assumed we do that. Now, we're an unusual health system in that most county health systems are supported by their county somewhere in the 15 to 30% range. Does anybody in here who's not Erica know how much support Metro gets from the county?
I can tell you in terms of millions. But
No. Percent of our operating budget. Anybody want to take a gander? 4%. So we actually this year refused our budget and actually had to put it in. We functionally run self-sustained and always have, and I don't know if you know how many counties have closed over the last 5 years. So you have no idea the operational, so please support us. But that's a different point. But the point is, on top of that budget, Metro has hired 4 community advocates, not directly involved in patient care, and is saying help your community where we're at. And so one of the pieces we've learned about is what making community benefit is. And so the big improvement method for us is that we as a system with the scale grant are now actually to talk the language of the other systems and perhaps engage the other systems. Are creating a community benefit plan, which we're not required to do. And we actually have somebody from SUMO who's now on board with us and is terrific, who's helping us do that. But I just, language-wise, what we've learned as a public health system, and nobody else in this entire Vermont is a public health system, they went, where's your ongoing money for this? And we went, huh? I've learned that there's this language and sustainment mechanisms in other places we don't have, and so as a facilitator, that's what we're doing to make ourselves stronger. The model seems to be pretty cool. Is that fair, Erica?
It is. And you see similar models to this. You see similar models to this but it's operationalized differently. Like some people have a steering committee and they'll have like a working group. But the way that the steering committee works and the way the working group works is different. They don't use the same type of decision-making process. They don't convene them in the same way.
And there are multiple resident groups that are totally empowered to just go do things. I haven't.
It's not. It's
the key to the whole thing.
And it's gotta be the foundational pieces of it too.
yeah.
Like if you even jumped in midway through this, you might not have the same. So like you almost have to always be talking about how it started. 'Cause I
Which
would
is why the
imagine,
disparities piece matters.
Yeah, that
If you're
part
not a
is-
facilitator or evaluator, I'm sorry, you had a question. I wanted to finish my
Yeah.
Not a question, a comment. We are unique, Cleveland, in our, for lack of a better way, to put it, our socialistic infrastructure.
Philanthropic.
I'm
Yes.
sorry, our philanthropic infrastructure, which began
Yeah.
with the new income tax law in 1916. And the fact that we were at the fourth or the fifth richest city in the United States at that time. And we have infrastructure that nobody, and I grew up in Oklahoma, so I know
Oh,
exactly
yeah.
what you're saying subtextually.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
but
Yeah.
we have the sociological will. I'm not sure the next generation does.
if we had a winning sports team, we'd probably
Yes,
have a-
we'd have it all.
That's probably
I do want to jump in here though, because I think that, to a certain extent, you don't want to idealize the infrastructure that's here in Cleveland.
Yeah.
And so, well,
We're just being honest.
We couldn't have done it without it.
It might not be infrastructure as much as it is an ideology.
So, but let me even just touch on that, because, you don't want to presume that, ideologically, we are not facing still some of the same
Absolutely.
power dynamics and isms that other communities face. And so, what's difficult about being able to lift up what's so great about, work like this, is that we often skim over some of the other, challenges that we
Yeah.
have. Some of the power dynamics that relate to how institutions work with each other, some of the subtext that's going on in terms of really, how money is disseminated.
It's gonna be having a little conversation, yeah.
Power and control issues
Yeah.
as it relates to community. So, we want to celebrate where we've gotten and not pretend as if we don't have some huge hurdles.
It's always the challenge though of saying, let's see how well we've done. And we don't, this is what stops us though. We tend not to go out there and say how well we are doing, because we do this right away. We say, we are doing well, but we don't want everybody to think we're done.
Yeah, well, I don't even think that's true. I think that what happens so often is that we pretend like, we've done great things, and it's like,
Yes, ma'am.
this is the end, this is
When you come back
the
down.
be
Oh,
all.
we're done,
And let's all just like, when,
But nobody really believes that.
yeah, we maybe don't really believe it, but how is it that we support the evolution of
Yeah.
the work?
Yeah,
Because
so
we're so
I like
careful
to,
talk about the
I like to,
iterative.
I actually like, Ms. Vera's gonna come back in, but we oftentimes will do that. I actually want Ms. Vera to come back and Andrea to just give from their perspective, because they're the ones who are kind of going through this now when she gets back in here. But yes, those power dynamics are very real, especially in the community where I am. The undertones around structural racism, it is very real. It has made this work extremely challenging. I'm not gonna sugarcoat that. It's a real reality. But what I have seen is working with those other national communities. Some people are better at that than others. Some people are very open about the partnership amongst institutions, and that's why some of those coalitions I also want are more regional, because the health departments and the healthcare systems, even though they compete, when it came to this, they all got on board.
Yeah.
And we're like, how the heck?
And that's actually what.
And it's not happening. I will say that it's not happening here that way. Not between
Yeah.
UH and Cleveland Clinic and Kate.
Yeah.
So that's a real barrier. I think she's out there talking, but just from her perspective on. Oh, you have a question?
I
Yeah.
have a question on sustainability, because
Mhm.
a lot of this was funded through the great work
Yep.
and support of St. Luke's Foundation, and now the hospital's really sort of
Yep.
embracing it. But again, the limited budget.
Yep.
The
So
partnership,
is there
yeah.
a business model to
Actually-
sort of address the continuum, because as we said, this is an annual process, this is ongoing, this has become part of the culture of health of the community.
So if you ask us back next year, it's actually, it's literally addressing that and working with that is in process. But what I will tell you is the vantage point of this. Remember, when we came up with this crazy idea, we didn't know if the residents would come. If they came, we didn't know how much impact it would
But I
have.
would argue it has to be taken out of the hospital walls too.
Oh, no,
Yeah.
we agree. And remember,
Yeah.
this number was in the hospital walls, but the point is this was, I won't go to that, but the point is now that we're very confident, especially with the replication, that the process and the approach, it really does work that well. That's actually what we're working on now, so I actually not entirely speaking about, checking.
Yeah, we are definitely like right up in our face, business and
But
economic.
we are working with the business community specifically.
Yeah.
and Trying to connect businesses and community.
Can we talk to
Yeah.
Because we're actually in the middle of something, that'd be great.
Yeah.
Could you, I know you want, and I'd like to hear from residents too, like, are there what would be the 2 or 3 things that really made this happen?
Ms. Vera,
Could you, like, is there a way of saying, like, was it, like, the one, can I just give my one observation? When you guys said, I think I remember Burdette saying, the idea of keeping the institutions at bay at the beginning. Like,
Yeah.
that would be an element, like, is that a component? What are the other pieces like that? Because those are take-home messages that other groups could do
yeah.
and try and see, so.
What you think, Ms. Vera?
What I think personally with Magnify Heal is that you have residents that's connecting with other residents. And you're bringing it back into the table. But when you bring it to the table, respectfully, it's taken to the ear and you can see the process. The community can see the process, although it was just a phone call or a talk on the corner or some little hard-headed boy, why you doing this, don't you need something else to do? They see it. Usually when businesses or institutions does something, you see it in a structure, a brick structure. You see it in a new car going down the street, but you do not see it on your soil that you walk on. So when a community connects with community, that's what it is. Community connecting with community. Everything is, the foundation, she could tell you, has never changed. Because I was there the first day. So the foundation never changed. That's what kept me there, because people wonder why I stay. Because when I leave the building and drive down my street, I could see Hill. I'm a foster parent. I had at a staffing, to my surprise, a parent say, I want my daughter to stay in this girl house. Everybody say, what? Now I was kicking the girl out. And you know what her answer was? And they told her, we're here because you wanted her out of this girl house. She said, yeah, but she's changed. You see how much weight she done lost? They didn't know Metro, Metro, got a program for giving high blood pressure. She don't take blood pressure pills no more. Her behavior changed because she had the opportunity to sit in on a meeting and see how people supposed to act. Okay? So I was like, wow, you don't even know they're reaching beyond community. To have someone at a staffing bring Heal into staffing. Nobody knew what Heal was. But they seen the product out of the youth, which was a foster child.
I don't think I can, it's pretty much
Yeah,
that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
This was even better than I thought. It was going to be good.